Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first session for the evening. This evening, we're going to talk about coordinating and juggling the behavior of our children, specifically our children with special needs, and our other children who are living in our house with us. So I'm going to open it up to our panelists and ask the first question that we have, and I'm going to ask everybody, there is a question and answer box at the top of your screen. So those of you who are watching this session, please feel free to put questions into that question and answer box. We're going to be monitoring it, and we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can during the next hour. The first question that we're going to start with is, in the current situation, what expectations should a parent have for their child with special needs regarding their behavior, and does it differ from their expectations for their other children? Dr. Lichtman, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to start the conversation going this evening.
Sure. So good evening, Batya and fellow panelists and everybody else who's joining. It's a pleasure to be here. So what expectations to have? The simple answer is that we always need to have expectations of all of our children, each of our children. We need to have expectations of ourselves, and we need to relax or increase those expectations subject to what they're experiencing, or for that matter, what we're experiencing. I think it's fair to say that everybody is experiencing something different and challenging. I think for most of us, I think there's a certain malaise, I'll call it, upon almost everyone. We're operating in some pseudo-crisis mode, and we're only doing what really needs to get done. And it's hard to summon up the energy to go much beyond that. So I think the first step is to just recognize that that is what's operating, at least for so many of us. Again, more specifically with regard to expectations, expectations of our children and ourselves are important. We need to have expectations. We need to have structure. We need to constantly be trying to grow. But those expectations depend upon the child, depends upon the age of the child, the stage of development of the child. And one of our jobs as parents is certainly to always be assessing and trying to evaluate where our child is at any given moment in time, to recognize when there are changes in them or in the environment. It's safe to say that there are many changes in the environment now. The environment has changed dramatically. So I guess the last thing I'll say about this is that, again, it's important to have expectations for each and every one of our children. It's important to have some of the same expectations for each of our children. And it's also important to have different expectations for each of our children. So for instance, it's important for all of our children to have chores and responsibilities, and yet different children, whether they have special needs or not, are at different stages of development. They're different ages, and so you wouldn't necessarily have the same chores or the same complexity, if you will, around different chores for each of the children. You ask children, and they'll always say, you have to be fair, and fair to them is giving each and every one the same and expecting the same from everyone. But we know that that's not true. Fair is giving to each child what they need. Fair is expecting from each child what they need. The challenge, of course, the rub is knowing at any moment in time what that is. But the bottom line is there need to be expectations of, I believe, of all of our children, and that the key, item is to understand the situation you're operating in, to understand who your child is at any given moment in time, if you will, and to respond accordingly.
So I want to go off of what Dr. Lichtman was just saying and pivot a little bit. I think that it's incredibly important to have expectations of your child with special needs, of your other children, of yourself at this time. But I think that you're only able to be, to hold the expectation for your child of where you're holding that day. So I think that it's something that's a day-to-day process. Like when I work with my own children, when I work with the families that I work with, it's, yesterday you might have had way more energy to be able to follow through on different tasks. And, follow through is always the most important. Consistency is important, but what you could be consistent with on Monday might be very different than what you'd be consistent with on Tuesday. And I think that that's where that honesty with yourself of what can I do today? And as long as everybody makes it to bed with 10 fingers, 10 toes, if that's what they started with in the morning, and breathing, then like I've done my job as a parent. And I think that if we have too much expectations and we're not able to rise to the challenge to support our children on those days, then what we're doing, thinking that we're really being helpful, could be potentially detrimental. So I think that that's an important perspective to put in, as you're deciding for the day what the different tasks are going to be and what battles you're going to pick and choose. And I think that it's something that you have to know yourself. You have to know your limits. You have to know your mental state, and you have to know where all of your children are holding. Because again, you don't want to put all of your energy into a child with special needs or a child without, and then not end up being able to equally give to everybody else in the family.
Thank you, Dr. Lichtman.
I think that's a really important
I would just
point
add
to
that.
also realize what. Go ahead, Michelle.
I agree with what both of you are saying. I think that I would also add that you need to understand the functions of behaviors and the fact that behavior is learned behavior. So you want to go back and you want to really understand what are those things that you know that your child can do without much intervention, without much pushback, and make sure that you're still expecting those. But some of those behaviors that you're just trying to teach now, they might not be a realistic time to teach new behaviors or to expect new behaviors, but to always remember to go at that baseline, because what you don't want to do is you don't want negative behaviors to become the learned behaviors that you now have to unteach when we end up going back to regular life. So I certainly want to say that, and I certainly want to say to what Dr. Lichtman was saying was, when we have any children, we always change our expectations depending on their age, their functioning level, who they are as people, their mood that day. And I think that that's very important to keep in mind, with the idea that we need to understand and give ourselves permission to be human and to feel and to know what we can and can't do, like what Toby was saying.
So interesting, Michelle, just to your point about again, knowing what behaviors you're going to target at a given time based on what their function is, and if they're new behaviors related to what's happening or if they're older behaviors. Something that has come up a lot in conversations with my colleagues is, how ethical is it to come up with a behavior plan for right now that is going to have to be undone once we slowly get back into real life, and could potentially result in more challenging behaviors then, right? And it's a very interesting dilemma, because while we don't want to make anything worse, at the end of the day, when we're, for the most part, confined to four walls, sometimes it's what's the lesser of two evils. Like, if you had asked me personally, prior to March, my son never saw the iPad. Then he saw the iPad, and I'm like, oh, it's okay if we do like Torah Treasures app, because like he's kind of learning something educational, right? So like, am I happy about it? No. Will there be a nice withdrawal process, like once he gets back to real life? 100%. But like, do I know that this is what we need in order to avoid meltdowns over bigger things later? Also 100%. So I think that it's, if it's something that you know that you can nip in the bud confidently early on, then I would say 100% go for it. If it's not something that you're comfortable with, and there's a replacement behavior that you don't love, but that you can be comfortable with for that time, knowing that, once you're able to have support of school and ComHab workers and behavior analysts or whoever else is coming through your door to help you, undo and to reteach once we're back into the real world, then sometimes that's the choice that's the safest choice to make.
Absolutely.
Look,
and the other thing
just
that you
building
use
on
in
that,
this context is social sport.
But I think the
Jeff?
key for, for all of this is, is what Toby said earlier, what Michelle said in a different way. And that is that you need to know what your resources are, what your own human resources are, as well as other resources. You have to be kind to yourself. We're all extended and challenged in ways that we've never been before. And frankly, again, every situation is unique and different, and you need to determine what it is for yourself. But I wouldn't be so worried about what's going to be after this when we go back. Now we're in a state of, let's call it semi-triage. And if you need to do things that that you wouldn't normally do in order to make the situation manageable, then that's perfectly fine. I think it's safe to say, using Toby's example, that there's probably virtually no household, maybe on the planet, in the United States certainly, that doesn't have children spending more time with screens than they had prior to this pandemic. That's just the reality. And it's just the reality. People are working. School is happening, or programs, if they're happening, are of limited duration, and children need to be occupied. And one of the ways that they're occupied are by these screens. So do you need to manage the content in terms of what they're watching? Sure. Do you need to try to limit the time? Sure, to some degree. But everybody is spending more time than they ever did before. And if you think they're not, you're wrong. And again, I wouldn't worry so much about what's going to be afterwards. You need to get through now in the healthiest, best way possible for your child, for all your children, and for yourself.
So I'm going to jump in with another question. How would you suggest that parents plan activities for their children and structure their day and their time with the children to be most effective? What tools and techniques can you suggest to help them as they plan the day for their kids? Michelle, would you like to start that one?
Sure. So I think that the first recipe for success for our kids and also as adults is to make sure, obviously to the best of your ability, that kids are eating, that they're exercising, and that they're sleeping. Obviously, I'm not talking rigorous exercise, I'm talking about moving. We need to remember that our kids, when they were leaving their houses and just going to school, just getting on and off school buses and walking around buildings, they were moving, and sitting is never really such a good thing for long periods of time. I think when we talk about the fact that they're going to have a lot more screen time, and I agree with Dr. Liffman and with Toby, like I see it in my own house with my own children, it's inevitable. I think that besides monitoring it for some of our kids with special needs, I think this is a great use for social stories for them to understand about why are we using it now and why didn't we use it before? Because for some of them, they might not understand why I was never able to touch an iPad and now I can be on an iPad whenever I want. In terms of structuring their time, when I've been meeting with parents over the past number of weeks, we've been talking a lot about this. It's work to structure time. It's work to create schedules. It's work to keep kids on a schedule. All these things are work. If they're not on a schedule and they're melting down throughout the day and you're having a miserable day, you're doing the work on that end also. So the question is, where are you going to put in the work? And I can tell you sometimes I myself have to be reminded to do those schedules when I see that I had a day that went awry. I realize, you know what, I better make a schedule for tomorrow when I get kind of lax. And schedules can be as sophisticated or non-sophisticated as you want. But one thing that I recommend, especially if there are working parents in the home, is to really make a list of things that your child can do independently and things that your child really needs time for and attention for. A lot of times our children's behaviors are a function of them wanting our attention or a function of something that we need to figure out what is that behavior, what is the function of that behavior. And if it's attention, scheduling in time in the day where they know when they're going to have time with you so that they can see it visually that that's going to happen, that's important for them. In addition, you want to scatter through independent activities along with coinciding with where your work schedule is. So if you have a work schedule meeting at 2 and you know that either they can't do anything on their own, maybe schedule screen time so that they're watching what they're watching during that half hour when you have to be in that meeting, or that hour when you have to be in the meeting. And really kind of look at your family's time versus your child's time and the independent things that they're able to do, and try and mesh them together. Many of our kids don't have a concept of time. So using visuals for them, along with things like visual timers and time timers, and having them have choice in certain places for some of our kids, depending on their functioning level, meaning, you know, you can do this or this during this time, or having them help create the schedule so that they can be part of that is always helpful. And then of course, going back to putting any sort of system for reinforcement, and reinforcement can mean, obviously, they can be working towards something or earning something, but reinforcement can simply be you catching them, keeping on their schedule, and telling them how proud you are of them, and having that positive vibe going throughout your day.
So I'm going to jump in after Michelle because I have some visuals that I was able to pull up as she was talking. I definitely agree that the more things that you are able to give your child that they could do independently, and I would also say not only independently, but that are preferred, it's definitely a good way to set up the day. I am going to share using visuals, and like visual schedules are incredibly helpful. So this is, you know, pre-COVID. If you were to ask me to make a visual schedule for a family, it would probably look something like this. So this family is at the end of their day, and they have nice little icons that say that we're going to wash, we're going to go to the bathroom, we're going to get dressed. Either your child could set them up on their own, you can set it up with them, they can have choices, you can set it up for them. There's many different ways you can work it. The icon gets removed as they're done doing the activity, so that way progress can be noted, right? It's a beautiful schedule, it's great. Now, what I would probably do, and it works just as well as this, is I take a nice sheet of paper and I draw stick figures. So we are going to eat breakfast. See, here's the waffle. And then we're gonna go ride on your scooter. And then we're gonna read a book, right? And you can have it on a piece of paper, and you can throw it out at the end of the day, and you can cross things out and change it. And if you lose an icon, it's not the end of the world, because who wants to be sitting there laminating pieces right now? But either way, the most important thing, as Michelle was saying, is that communication piece of, you know, I wouldn't just hand this over to my child, because even though these are fantastic stick figures, they still won't know what they mean. So setting up the schedule with them, so that way expectations are clear of what the schedule is going to look like and what activities they're going to engage in. You know, so saying, okay, and now we're going to have breakfast, now we're going to have scooter, and then we're going to read a book or eat pie, whichever one it is. Go through it with them, cross it off. And then just use it to keep coming back to it. So if they're on target, you could say, like, I love it, like, you're checking your schedule, you're doing a great job. If they're off task, it's, you know, let's check your schedule and see where we're supposed to be going. But either way, that communication and that expectation, along with the visual to keep them on track, is definitely very important. And I would say that visual schedules they're the most magical things in the world. I have found that in all the years that I've practiced, if I say to a child, okay, it's time to brush your teeth, I could be hit with the biggest resistance. If I say, okay, let's make a schedule together of what we have to do the rest of the night, we're going to take out our clothes for tomorrow, we're going to take a shower, we're going to do those same activities where we were going head to head, and all of a sudden it's, okay, we're ready to do this. So a lot of this anxiety or tension, it could just be the act of putting it on a schedule and setting up the expectations that are clear for myself and my children of what is to be done, and not the number of activities or, you know, how many sequins you can fit on a doll's dress or whatever it is. It's just that this is another tool for effective communication when there's so many pieces flying that it could be easy to get lost. Information can get lost in translation.
So I think that what Michelle and Toby have shared is, you know, is spot on. I just want to add a couple of things. And the first one is that, sometimes we could be sitting here. It's very easy to be the panelist and to give out advice or, suggestions, etc. And you could be sitting there thinking, really, you want me to draw stick figures? At the end of the day that never ends. And now you want me to sit down. Oh, and you want me to do it with my child? So the first thing I want to remind you is that, typically none of the people, who are, even if you are a teacher, you're here in the capacity as a parent. And whatever your expertise is, and parents have tremendous expertise, but you're a parent. And, so again, we said it before, and I think it has to be said again, you have to have realistic expectations of everybody, including yourself, okay? Yes, we all need to plan and structure, and plan means in advance. So ideally, the night before, you want to plan. Ideally, you want to plan the day before and include the child if you can, but you might be working and not be able to get to that child. So as valuable as it is to plan with the child, you may not be able to, and you may have to do it yourself when you're really tired that night before. And then you ideally introduce it the next day at the beginning of the day with the child. I'm reminded also, I try to watch the 11 o'clock news at night with my wife, Helen, and that's sort of like the end of the day, hopefully. And a couple of weeks ago, we were watching, and the anchor said, okay, we're going to turn to the weatherman, but first we want to introduce it with a clip, which was very strange. And he had this clip, and you saw the weatherman on the earlier news at 7 o'clock doing the weather, and he had his two daughters came on, and his wife was on a Zoom meeting. He's working. Channel 2 News, CBS, a pretty big, high profile, kind of job. His two daughters come on. They don't want to go off. He's got to pick them up. Then one of them is starting to cry. So, on the one hand, that's the life that we're all living. And I think our jobs even, have changed. And it's understandable, that if you didn't get to plan, or if the plan doesn't work and you get interrupted, in a work Zoom or a work meeting or whatever it might be. This is the new norm, and even in job settings. And I think that that's, understood. By the same token, to the degree that you can plan in advance, is going to be better. And then I want to add one other tool. Toby, Michelle both referenced visuals a lot, schedules. Those are all really important things. Michelle suggested exercise, and I don't think that can be emphasized enough. Not just for getting out, not just for the physical well-being, but even, literally walking, exercising releases endorphins. It actually helps our mental state, the mental state of our children, the mental state of ourselves. So that can't be emphasized enough. But I think there's another tool that we often overlook, and that is the human resources that we have around us. And virtually all of us have some human resources around us. We're lucky enough to have a spouse, great. Then that's then that's a resource. If we have other children in the family, we have other older siblings, that's a resource. If we have other families, away, we're doing this by Zoom. Okay, there's phone, there's FaceTime, there's Zoom. We have neighbors. We have high school kids who get involved with our Yachad members all the time. Why can't we reach out to them, either for that meeting that Michelle referenced, 2 o'clock, I have an important Zoom meeting. I really want to try to do everything I can not to be disturbed. And maybe my child has a hard time, or by 2 o'clock, our schedules don't mesh. My meeting is at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock is already late in the day for Chaim or Chani, and they need, somebody there to help them. Well, maybe it's time, in advance to ask for help, to call a grandparent, who's not there, or a cousin, and maybe they can read the same book together, or just read a book, or play a game, even virtually. There are things that can be done. We have to ask, okay? And we have to be willing to ask. And that's not something that comes naturally to many of us. As parents, we often think that this is our job to do. It is our job to do, but it's also our job to ask for help when we need it. I don't think there's anybody today in this environment that doesn't need help of one sort or another. And many groups, have been identified for the help that they've been giving to one another. certainly, anybody who helps you, who helps your child or helps you around your child, at the end of the day is helping themselves also. So I just want to emphasize to you that I think there are resources, and if you take a step back and think about it, all planning is challenging, creating structure is challenging. Again, as Michelle started, to the degree that you put time and effort into it is the degree to which you're more likely, no guarantee, to have a more successful experience for your child and for yourselves. And therefore, please do reach out to those around you. Even by the way, if you do have other children at home, the siblings, often they have suggestions, often they can rise to the occasion and give them that opportunity. It's an opportunity, it's not a burden.
So a couple questions that are coming up from this whole discussion are when you have a child who is very rigid and doesn't do well with flexibility, do these visual schedules work well with those children? And also, will social stories that I know Michelle mentioned before, is that a tool that's going to also help with these children?
So I guess I'll chime in because they asked about the social stories. So actually, as many of you, I'm sure, who listening or know, my son Avi, he has autism, and he actually is very rigid and set in his ways and likes things the way he likes them. And social stories and visual schedules have literally saved his life in terms of his ability to function in this world. And ones that we've gotten from places and ones that we've written ourselves. And in addition, he graduated. The picture ones are phenomenal, but then eventually he graduated to a checklist where he just checked them off as he went along. So what I can say is that at the end of this session, everyone will be provided with my contact information, and any parent out there who wants help with figuring out how to make a schedule, wants help with figuring out how to write these social stories, how to figure it out, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'm happy to hop on the phone and help you work through it.
And I'll chime in with the second part because I like social stories, but not as much as Michelle does. But I think that when we look at our children and their skills and whatever deficits are showing now, we also have to think about what was happening and how they were doing 3 months ago. Was it that 3 months ago they were doing better in flexibility and this has caused a regression? Or was it that 3 months ago you were still struggling with that ability to be flexible? Because I think something that I saw at the beginning that I think that all those people who were posting like those very elaborate schedules of like their day broken down into 15-minute increments that people are finally getting is that like you're not homeschooling and you're not teaching, even if you are teachers by profession, like this is like crisis education. Michelle, you worded it much better before. I don't remember exactly what you said. But
what I said was we're not homeschooling, we're schooling at home.
That's true. And this is crisis education. So I think that if you're dealing with a situation where there's regression, then I would be back in touch, if possible, with the people that worked with you to get him to the point of being able to be more flexible and see how that plan can be adjusted. And I think that if flexibility has been an ongoing issue and it wasn't something that was easy 3 months ago, this is not necessarily the best timing in the right environment with the right tools, with the right things to be teaching a skill such as flexibility. Again, I don't know if we're talking about a 5-year-old or a 20-year-old. Definitely makes a difference. There's a lot of variables that, again, as Michelle and I'm sure as Dr. Lichtman, our contact information will be up. We're very happy to take questions outside of this session. But I think that to expect that you're going to change your child's entire way of thinking just because this is what we need to do for right now is unrealistic. I think that looking at ways to band-aid the situation, so if there's ways to put a reinforcement system in place where it's like, listen, I get that you want to do this at this time. Right now we have to do this at this time. We're setting up your schedule. If you're able to finish doing that by 7 o'clock, here's the reinforcement that you're going to earn, right? So you're not quite solving the issue. You're not teaching all the background skills necessary for flexibility, but you're at least making it that this is something that you can potentially get through. I would also then say my second question is, and it's only something that you know because whoever asks, you would know how it's affecting the family dynamic, is how much is flexibility affecting the functioning of your family? Like, is it like something that's idiosyncratic and it's driving you crazy? Is it that none of your other children could go to bed on time because they're still insisting on doing things at a specific time? Is it that they're not able to get the things done that they need to get done in a daily day? And I would really look and see if it's not directly affecting them or impacting them or the family in a negative way. This might just be one of those things that it's, drop it. Like I hear this is really frustrating. Like this conversation is really hard for me to have. I'm going to go take 5 minutes. Like let me know when you're done and we're ready to move on to something else. So it's just, there's a lot of variables that need to be considered. But those are my two thoughts.
I agree, Toby, and I think the other piece to this is knowing the functioning level of your child in general, meaning for some of our kids who are higher functioning, whose comprehension level is very different, the level of conversation you're going to have with them regarding any behavior or any expectation is going to be very different than someone whose capabilities are not the same. And in addition to that, even when you look at social stories, there are social stories that are very in-depth, there are social stories that are like a word and a picture just laying out what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. So I think that whatever strategies we're using, we have to look at the full picture, the full family. I totally agree with you, Toby. And we also need to understand the give and take of our child's functioning ability in their level to comprehend any of this.
So Dr. Lichtman, I'm going to address this to you to start with. One of the things I'm hearing from a lot of parents in my conversations in the last few days is there's a lot of concern about what's going to happen in the summer, and the kids especially who are having trouble with the present situation and with being inflexible and with the structure or lack of structure that they're feeling right now. Come summer, they're feeling that the structure is going to be even less. And how are they going to react to this? And as things may be even going less well as the summer approaches, what kind of suggestions, what kind of thoughts can you help these parents to help get their children to stay on track or to get back on track as they're approaching the summer?
So, I do a lot of work with schools and with parents. And last week, I actually did a webinar for parents. This was not parents of children with special needs. This was, mainstream parents. And the main message that I tried to communicate to them around the very significant anxiety that they're feeling. Parents are feeling tremendous amount of anxiety. They're feeling anxiety because, again, they're being asked to more directly be involved in their children's education, with their children's day-to-day functioning, while they're still managing a house and a job and whatever else it might be. And there's a lot of anxiety. And the main message that I shared on that webinar and that I would share with everybody tonight, chill out. I have no other way to put it. We're all, you hear a lot, we're all in this together. No, we're not all in everybody has a different situation, but we are all experiencing this. And it's not just this community that, parents who have children with special needs, but it's all parents who are having anxiety and are concerned about regression and concerned about not meeting the curriculum and not staying on par. The fact of the matter is that any school that is at all good, decent, is going to pick up with your child when they come back to school. But you asked more specifically about the summer. So let's, turn to that. The first thing I think is, first of all, again, I want to emphasize the anxiety part that I think most of us as parents are feeling, and make no mistake that your children pick up on that anxiety. Okay. Now, on the one hand, you can't help your feelings just as they can't help their feelings, but you can help. What you can think about is, and reflect on, is how you're feeling and what you do with those feelings. And I think actually as a parent, I think our first responsibility is to be aware if we are feeling anxiety and how that's manifesting itself, and how to share it in more healthy ways with our children than not. It's perfectly okay, and most of our kids can understand if we sit down and explain to them, you know, this is really hard for mommy, this is really hard for daddy, for tati, for abba, for saba, for whoever it is, because X, Y, and Z. In simple terms, that they can, it's really hard. Just like you're not going to school, you don't have your regular, you don't get to see your friends. I don't get to see my friends. I don't get to do my thing. You know, I have to be at home. I have to work with you besides doing my job. Hey, so be aware of your anxiety, acknowledge it to yourself, and even, you know, appropriately acknowledge it to your children. And let's have some perspective here. You know, I know that you know, what I say may not, what I'm about to say may not fly with a lot of you, but frankly, the pandemic is going to end. And, you know, and then everybody, you know, is concerned, you know, when it ends, you know, like, are things going to be different? I don't know if things are going to be different. I'm sure some things will be different. I suspect most things will be the same, because people are people, and we are, as humans, creatures of habit, and we tend to go back to, you know, what we've been doing for the last fill in blank 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, as opposed to what we've been doing just for the last 3 months or however long this will be. So, you know, now is now, and I wouldn't worry about later on so much. And when it comes to the summer, I think summer's an easier time, okay? Summer's an easier time because everybody's off. You know, it's not like they're missing school like anybody else or anything else. There is a generally more relaxed time. You're typically more able to go outside. Your kids are more able to go outside. Okay, there are more things to be able to take advantage of. And so, yes, you may not, and we don't even know that for sure yet, but let's even assume that there's no camp. Well, if we manage for 3 months, somehow, with everything that we have to manage, including some facsimile of school, so there'll be some facsimile of camp. What is camp? It's the same kinds of activities that we've been talking about doing. You know, now, why is it any different a month from now, when quote unquote the school year is over and summer has begun? It's really no different, except hopefully that you'll put less pressure on yourselves for having to do X, Y, and Z. You should do, you must do. In this environment, there's not a lot of things that you need to do other than to be kind to yourselves, to be kind to your children, and to understand that even though they're smaller, younger, perhaps intellectually challenged, they're feeling this also in whatever ways they're feeling it, just as we each individually feel it in different ways. And so when it comes to the summer, you know, look, by the way, I want to tell you, I'm blessed. I have 5 grandchildren who live around the corner from me, and we, you know, have been together in this from the beginning. So there's no social isolation for us with my grandchildren. What there is school every day, 5 days a week. My 5 grandchildren come to me for school, and you know, so my day now is very long because I try to get in a couple of hours before they come at 8:45, 9 o'clock, and then the rest of the day starts at 3 o'clock, and between that, from 9 to 3, I'm with them. So I understand the juggling of, and I recognize that I may go from school to camp, in a month or whatever it might be, and I look at it as it's going to be easier, frankly, because then I don't have to worry. I'm not worried, but I don't have to be concerned about supporting or maintaining whatever the school work that's being sent home to do. I don't have to worry about that in the summer. And so now I can do with them whatever it is that I and they and we want to do, whether it's taking a hike every day or playing ball or, you know, doing all sorts of other things. So I see the coming of summer not as a greater challenge, but frankly as a lesser challenge, because there are lesser external expectations, certainly, and I think you should either remove whatever expectations you have for the summer, other than to have a good, family, time as much as possible together. This is a great time. I'm going to say one more thing and then stop. For all the challenges that this presents, there are also opportunities, and we should take advantage of those opportunities. This is a great time. Sometimes our kids with special needs don't get to spend a lot of time with siblings if there are siblings around, okay? And now everybody is at home. Let's use that time to facilitate bonding and building relationships together, which sometimes can be very difficult. And especially can be difficult when everybody's running helter and skelter in different directions. Well, now we're not running so much, okay? Let's create opportunities. I want to, it was Lag BaOmer, a week ago or, a week and a half ago. And, I wanted to do something different. So we said that, that night we got all of my children, grandchildren together, those of us who are here and not socially isolated. And we went into the backyard, we made a fire, we sang, we danced. If it was a regular Lag BaOmer, my grandchildren would have done whatever they did in school. It probably wouldn't have been too much. And that would have been the end of it. It was so nice. It was so nice. Now, listen, I live in the real world. One of my grandchildren was getting cranky because it was getting a little late at 8:30. That's part of the reality also. So you need to know when to cut it, right? But all I'm saying is that for all the challenges, and I'm not minimizing them, I think summer actually, other than the fact that it's built on maybe 3 months already, that we have to keep going, but I think change the way we think about it. It's not school year, it's not more time, it's summer. What fun, different kinds of things can we do? How can we involve our other family members and others to make for a more enriched experience?
So I actually think
yeah.
that, Dr. Lichtman, just to end on actually something that you had brought up earlier, is that there are so many resources that have been identified within the mental health realm, within the larger community and the Jewish community. And I think that something that I actually hear a lot from parents is that, we don't use our OPWDD waiver because there's too much going on, or we don't use our ComHab, or, we never thought to get those ABA services through insurance because we just don't have time. And I think that as we're in a phase where we're starting to open up, a lot of agencies are able to provide the services that they provided all along very well through telehealth. I've been doing telehealth for 3 months and personally have been very impressed with what people who are able to do it are able to do, what policies are able to put in place with social distancing. So I think it's also this is the time to kind of look at your toolbox and say, even if a year ago ComHab didn't make sense, maybe this makes sense now. Maybe if a year ago that ABA through insurance didn't make sense, maybe it makes sense now, and just start reaching out, because that's time that could be filled and structured, and still working on a lot of the skills that are coming up that are hard for families, that will help with whatever transitions have to be made, and just be able to give that respite time if summer school is not happening or camp is not happening. So I think that knowing how to tap back into our community for resources and accessing them in the ways that we feel comfortable with is really essential at this time.
Absolutely.
I just want to say one thing. I know we're racing against the clock, but I really just want to say one thing.
You're good.
I know that there are camps, special needs camps, that have announced already that they're not opening. And while I completely agree with Toby about the services and completely agree with Dr. Lichtman that this really is a time where we're really able to tap into so many things that we couldn't, but I think that we also need to recognize that there are families that live all year for the respite they're going to get when their children who don't sleep, who have difficult behaviors, go. Not just the parents, but the siblings. It's a whole family thing. I think we need to recognize that. And while I don't have any brilliant words of wisdom to make this easier for you, all I can say is that as parents, we always have to make sure to secure our oxygen masks first and to take care of ourselves. And I wish you all a wonderful and healthy summer.
So I want to thank you all for being on this panel, for joining us tonight. We are right now putting up the contacts. Please follow up, parents, with these amazing, amazing resources. Dr. Lichtman, Michelle Steinhardt, Toby Las-Carpel. They really are willing to talk to you to continue this conversation. Unfortunately, we only have a limited amount of time each evening, and there are so many more questions that you all have. We know that. Um, we thank them really for sharing their time and being with us this evening.